I love this quote by Eliot: "These fragments I shore up against my runes." The argument of Carr is seductive, but according to my colleague at University of Toronto, Endel Tulving, short-term memory and long-term memory are not the only types of memory operating in information processing. He has identified at least two other types: episodic and semantic memory. Episodic memory is the one of the sensory experience of things, and surely online we get a lot of that, in spite of being secondary senses. It is stimulated by the senses and is capable of containing and sustaining many more and different things than short-term memory. It is also used to transfer information to long-term memory, and it constitutes semantic memory. This is the memory that records the thing that we know ordinarily, combined with the verification of direct experience that episodic memory gives us. This may imply that learning online in multimedia addresses principally episodic memory, and of course, that's why people have said for years that an image is worth 1,000 words. I don't understand why this didn't come to the mind of Carr. So what we have now is, what we are becoming now is hyper-readers. I write readers because we cannot read anymore without also writing. As we are exchanging information and we are constant dialogue with hypertext, we're constantly reading and writing at the same time, or tempted to write at the same time as read, or linking or going to somewhere else. So there's obviously a different kind of attitude towards any kind of information processing that is becoming at this point. The absolute presence of Twitter. Twitter is one of, not that I am a big fan of Twitter, but Twitter is one of the most interesting maturation process of the whole history of internet since the beginning of the telegraph. Twitter is the real-time response of people to whatever situation there is. So we can just banalize it and say, I'm at a good pizza restaurant and my pizza is good. Forget that. But if you have an accident, or if something happens like it happened in New York when a plane landed into the Hudson River, somebody was there to take a photograph and Twitter it to the world. In 7 minutes, the whole world knew about it. So obviously, the reaction time that we have in relation to what events that are happening is something that is completely different from the situation we've had in the past. The memory and identity of the user is outside and not inside his or her body. We learn to put our identity and constitute ourselves very carefully by reading processes. Now we put it on MySpace and Facebook. Kids are actually building their identity through their network and not anymore specifically through their own kind of reading process. Writing tends to become iconic rather than sequential, and this development spends the end of oriented narrativity and of individual destiny. The Greeks invent tragedy because tragedy represents how individual destiny comes into the life of people. And suddenly we don't have an individual destiny anymore. We have a collective, a connective destiny. So clearly the kind of narrative structures that we have developed in the history of writing and fiction is actually now being tested and challenged by hypertext and hypermedia in very, very powerful fashion. Surely Carr is right. Yes, he's right. He's right in the way Amon-Ra was right when listening to the invention of writing by the god Thoth. Amon-Ra said, oh, it's one thing to know how to invent things. It's another to know the consequence of invention. You think you have helped the memory of humans. In fact, you have destroyed it. Why? Because they will now confide in these things outside their minds in order to actually remember things, and they will be full of inanities and saying silly things. Very interesting argument. Just another Carr, basically. But Havelock answered to Plato, putting memory outside the mind gives room for invention and practicing intelligence. If, according to Havelock, writing and reading liberated the mind of the necessity to remember, it thus left room for innovation. It may be that today, new media free us of the need to actually think, while software does it for us. This gives Carr some credibility. But the real news may be that intelligence itself is changing its fundamental strategies. Electronic reading is multimedial, telegraphic, nervous, neural, connected, plural. But the big news is this. Electricity is the third adventure of language. We've known language supported by bodies, where in fact language controlled bodies. We've known language supported by text, where bodies control language. Now we know a situation where electricity is moving language at full speed, at the speed of light, and where in fact a hybrid situation occurs. Yes, we still maintain something like an identity, but now we are more and more controlled by the system outside that is actually the electronic environment. So, yes, I now quote again both Heidegger and Siegfried, existing online, yeah, that's exactly what's happening, being offline. Thank you. Fast enough.
Is there any question?